Have you ever wondered how to alter a pattern to get the look that you want? Well, today I'm going to show you just how that's done by using the pattern from Vogue. This is pattern number V8957. I think that you are really going to love it. Today we're going to start by putting some tape on our mannequin so we can know exactly the look that we want. So here's my shrug look. This is a really nice mock-up made out of the Vogue pattern that I showed you. It is a short bolero. It comes right underneath and goes down to the waist, and it has cropped sleeves. However, we're going to change this to a different look. We are going to make it a little wider in the front, a little lower in the back, and we're going to drop the sleeves. So let's get started. Okay, so first we're going to need some tools. We're going to need to have some dotted pattern paper, and I can put the description in the link below. You're going to need to have some pencils with the erasers. Okay, make sure you have your pencils with the erasers. You're going to need to have several different types of markers. These markers I love because they have broad tip as well as a sharp tip. That's going to be very useful. Okay, you're going to need to have tracing paper, and you're going to need to have a tracing wheel. That's very important. You're going to need to have your paper scissors and your fabric scissors. You're going to need to have your tape measure. Make sure you have a nice tape measure. You're going to need to have several different types of rulers. I prefer see-through rulers with lines that we can use for squaring off, as well as this is my favorite pattern ruler that I like to use. I use this for the lines to square off as well. Any type of ruler that you like to use that you can see through and that you can make your measurements. I love this ruler because it has centimeters on one side and it has the inches on the other side. And any ruler that you can use to round off your pattern. You are also going to need to have your pattern. Okay, and this is the Vogue pattern that we're using today, Vogue V8957. And this pattern is interesting because it has 4 different views. But today we're using only one view, and we'll talk about that later. We're also going to be using the largest size, which is size 14. This pattern is a close fitting pattern. So if you have this pattern, if you look at the very top where it says Mrs. Jacket, close fitting jacket. So that's what we're going to be altering today. We're going to make this a little bit more loose and altered for our customer. The last thing that you're going to need is our mannequin tape. So we use this mannequin tape so that we can mark off our mannequin, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. Okay, so for this pattern, as we mentioned, we're using letter C. So we're going to be using the view C. And if we remove our instructions from the pattern, it's going to show you that for the C, it tells you exactly here what pieces to pull out. And I've already pulled out my pieces. We only need 3 pieces. We're going to need our front piece. This is piece number 14. We're going to need our back piece, piece number 15. And we're going to need our sleeve. This is piece number 8. So we're going to use these 3 pieces for our fashion fabric as well as our lining. So that's all we need. We don't need anything else. We also need to take a look at our instructions here, because it tells us that we are going to be using 5/8 inch seam allowances, which is included in the pattern. So this is a commercial pattern which already includes a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Normally I like to work with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but today we're going to be working with the 5/8 inch seam allowance since this pattern is already made. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so the very first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go over to the mannequin and take a look at our mannequin. So let's take our tape measure and go over to our mannequin. So what we're going to do is from here all the way around, we're going to come out just a little bit, so 1/4 of an inch, and then we're going to follow the line. And so what I want you to do is measure. So I measured from here all the way down, and as you can see, it gets wider and wider and wider as you go. So our measurement for our side seam, well, if we take that measurement, that comes out to be 7 inches. So we measured down to the bottom of our tape and we get 7 inches. We also have our measurement from our drop sleeve. We're going to come down 1.5 inches. So it's 1.5 inches from the seam to the top of our tape, 1.5 inches. And we measured from the back of our jacket to the bottom, 17.5 inches. Okay, so now that we have our measurements, I'm going to get a notepad. Okay, so let's write down what we know. Our back length is 17.5 inches long. Our side seam is 7 inches long. Then our drop shoulder is 1.5 inches. So let's put that to the side for a moment. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our first piece. And this is very important why we need to use dotted paper. We need to use dotted paper because we're going to use these lines for our guide. So we want to make sure we have enough room at the bottom of our pattern so we can work with. Okay, so let's take our first piece. We're going to take a look at our front piece and we're going to find a mark that we can use to square some lines. So I'm going to start here because we have these little crosses that's perfect for lining up. I'm going to get my marker. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to square a line down and I'm going to square a line all the way over, and you'll see why. Okay, so I squared down, I squared over, and I'm going to square over out some more. So here's my first squared line. Okay, so I have my front piece, number 14. This is my front bodice. I'm going to line this piece up with the squared lines that I created. And I'm going to make sure that the grain line is absolutely correct. And I'm going to make sure that the point of my side seam is exactly on this cross line. So when everything lines up, I'm just going to go ahead and tape my piece down. So once I get everything lined up, go ahead and tape it down. Make sure that the grain line stays straight. Okay, and here is my side seam on the line, exactly where I want it. As I showed you on the mannequin, we're going to drop our armhole down. That's the very first thing. In order to get this measurement correctly, I need to also add some width between my two side seams. So I'm going to move my back piece over. So let's find a point on the line that is 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches away from our side seam where it starts. So let's mark that point. Let's measure 1.5 inches over, or 4 centimeters, and we're going to mark that point. So now what I want to do is, you see how your back is not straight? What we want to do is we want to make sure that our side seam is on that line at that point, 1.5 inches away from our first side seam, but we need to make sure that our grain line is straight. Okay, so my grain line is straight. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape my side seam, and I'm going to tape my bodice down so that it doesn't move. Now, one thing I have to tell you, and this is so important, is that when you use these commercial patterns over and over and over again, they begin to stretch, especially if you iron them, then you fold them and you iron them over and over again. They do begin to stretch. So you have to keep that in mind when you're using these. It's better to put, if you really like this pattern, to go ahead and trace it onto cardstock or pattern paper that's nice and thick so that you'll have something that doesn't stretch. Okay, so my pattern is down. So here are some of my measurements that I want to refer to. So we said that we're going to have a 17.5 inch. We're going to go down 17.5 inches from the top of the pattern. We measured it. So let's make that mark. And so we have some guidelines that we're going to work with. So we have our side seam that we drop down 7 inches. Our back is 7.5 inches. Our front side seam, 17.5, 7 inches, and 7.5. So we have some guidelines that we could work with, okay? And what we need to do right now is we need to make our side seam, okay? We have a new side seam. So we said that this was 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters. So what we're going to do is find our halfway point. All right, so we have 3/4 inch is our halfway point. So we're going to mark that 3/4 inch, and we're going to square down. 1, 2, 3. And now let's just square down. Okay, so that's 3/4 inch, halfway through. So this is our new seam line. This is our new side seam line. Okay, so now we have our 7-inch mark that we need to go down. If we go down 7 inches on our side seam, we still have to take into consideration our side seam dart. All we have to do is go ahead and pivot our ruler over so that it lines up with your side seam here, and go ahead and mark your 7-inch mark. And I made some marks already that were not right, so I'm just going to go ahead and mark exactly where it's supposed to be, and I'm going to draw that line down to that 7-inch mark. That's our new side seam for our back, And for our front, same concept, just maneuver your ruler. Your ruler could pivot. Let me go ahead and mark this point as number 1. Now what I want to do is come down from that point number 1 down on my side seam by 1 inch. And I'm going to square all the way across. Okay, so I dropped down 1 inch. Let's go ahead and mark this point as number 2. Now I need to measure from my back bodice notches to my new point, number 2. Number 2 is going to be my final point. So let's get a different color marker. Let's use green. And I'm going to create a new armhole. All right, and there you have it. This is your new armhole. Now we need a new measurement. We need the measurement from our back notches to our new number 2. And we're going to need the measurement from our front armhole notch to our number 2. So let's measure that with our tape measure. I like to stand my tape measure up when I'm taking this measurement. So I get 7 inches on my back. So I'm going to number this number 3. So from 3 to 2, let's move this up. So from 3 to 2, I get 7 inches. Let me make this a little darker so you can see. From 3 to 2 equals 7 inches. So this is number 3. And let's make this one number 4. And let's see what we get from 4 to 2. And so for measurement 4 to 2, I get 6 3/4 of an inch. So these measurements we're going to transfer over to our shoulder. So now we have to take a look at our sleeve, because we need to match our sleeve. Since we dropped our armhole, we need to match our sleeve to be the same as our armhole. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to make sure that this sleeve here is straight. Okay everyone, if you like getting awesome tips and techniques on how to create beautiful garments just as much as I love showing you, then like and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit the bell so you can be reminded every time I do another video. So I'm going to go ahead and mark a line that I'm to work with for my grain line. So this is our grain line for our sleeve. Now what I need to do is I have a measurement from 1 to 2, which we said was 1 whole inch. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my sleeve the same way that I did for my front and my back arm side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use half of that measurement. So instead of going down 1 whole inch, I'm only going to go down a half of an inch. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a line that we're going to work with. I'm going to go down half of an inch from that line. All right, so half of an inch. Okay, so now I'm going to use these measurements. The first measurement from 3 to 2 was 7 inches. So I need to measure from my back. This is my back. Let's give that a number. Let's give that a number 5. So we have 5, 6, 7, 8. And so we have our new armhole depth. And so now we need to make sure that that back notch and that arm where we end is the same. And we said it was 7 inches. So we're going to measure 7 inches. We dropped our armhole, our sleeve cap, we dropped it to match our armhole, but we went down only a 1/2 of an inch here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to continue our curve to that point. All right, so we have our green marker and we traced in a new sleeve. All right, so now that we have our new sleeve, let's go ahead and measure. We're going to measure from 5 to 7, but we have to measure it, and it needs to be 7 inches, the same as our back notch to our new armhole. Same thing, to our new side seam, our back notch to our new arm seam. So that was 7 inches. So let's measure 7 inches. That's where we have our new arm seam. That's the back. And now let's do the front. 6 3/4 of an inch. So from 6 to 8. Okay. From 6 to 8, and here's our point, 6 3/4 of an inch. And now what we need to do is we need to draw our line. So here's our sleeve. We have some measurements that we took for our model, and the arm length for our model is 23 inches. So we're going to go from this point and we're going to measure down 23 inches. But we need another 5/8 of an inch for our seam allowance. So 23 5/8 of an inch ends here. So we have a 23 5/8 of an inch that ends there. We're going to make our sleeve come all the way down to meet that. Now the question is do we want our sleeves to have the same design? Yes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this pattern right where it says lengthen or shorten here. So you never want to lengthen at the bottom, you want to lengthen where it tells you to on the pattern. So right here where it says lengthen or shorten is where I'm going to use my paper scissors and I'm going to cut. All right, so now I just need to use my same grain line. So this is my grain line. Remember we made the grain line? Bring your sleeve all the way down. All right, so you stayed on the grain line. You brought it down to 23 inches. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and draw in our new sleeve. So we lowered our sleeve. So remember, we have a new seam line that we have to take into consideration. Here's a new seam line. And we're just going to go all the way down and all the way down. Okay, so now that I've done my sleeve, let's work on our front and back bodice. The shape of the front and back bodice. We still have to go ahead and get this line nice and rounded. So we can do that with our ruler here. Okay, so this is the back bodice, all ready to go. Now I'm going to work on the front. The front is going to come all the way from up here, the top part. We already have our seam here, but we want it to go out 1/4 of an inch in this. We're going to end up at this mark. Okay, so now we've completed our back bodice, our front bodice. So we have our new armhole. So this is not our armhole anymore. We have our new armhole for our sleeve that's going to be matching our armhole here. So now, remember, we dropped our sleeve cap. We dropped our sleeve cap down by 1.5 inches. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a drop sleeve cap that's 1.5 inches. Okay, so this is our mark where we're going to move or have our sleeve drop, but we don't want it to be so straight. I'm going to give it a little bit of a curve here. Okay, so here's my dropped shoulder, because remember our shoulder on the mannequin. I wanted to drop the shoulder about 1.5 inches, and I don't want it to be too radical of a seam, so I curved it in just about 1/4 of an inch. So that's perfect. Now I need to come down 1.5 inches over here on my sleeve cap. And so the way to do that is to measure down 1.5 inches on the sleeve cap. So I measured down 1.5 inches on my sleeve cap. And so what I need to do is I need to keep my point here. So I'm going to bring that down, and I'm going to make sure that I keep my notches. So how am I going to do that? I need to round off my sleeve cap so that it's 1.5 inches down, but I want to keep my notches. I'm going to go ahead and remove my tape. Okay, so you're going to take your ruler. I marked my back notches, my front notch, 5 and 6, and this is my shoulder point right here. I came down 5/8 of an inch and I made my circle. So let me make a straight line. Okay, then now we're going to curve in. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get out tracing paper here. Okay, and I'm going to trace. And here's my darts again. It's okay to do those darts again. And then I'm going to trace my line. Okay, so that's my one line. I didn't get all the way up to the green line. Let me try again. Okay, so we trace all the way up to the line. Now let's do this side. All right, so there you have it. So if you can see, so now this is my new sleeve cap. And so what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and fix this so that it's not too much of a hard seam. Okay, and on this side, so there's my notch, my notch, my notch, and then this is my all right, there you have it. So now what I can do is I can remove my sleeve. But before you remove your sleeve, you need to make sure you have all of your points, your notches, and everything. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and transfer all of my notches onto my new patterns, and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so we have our patterns. We have our front. We have our back. So this is the front, the back, and we have our drop sleeve. So now what I'm going to do is just cut them out and I'm going to go ahead and make. Okay everyone, I completed the altered jacket. This is the altered look of the Vogue pattern that I used. It is longer on the sides and the back, and the sleeves are longer. So this is the mock-up. I think it came out perfect. I think I'm ready to go ahead and lay it down on my fabric and start cutting it out. And I'm going to be following the instructions for the Vogue pattern, so if you'd like, you can follow along, and when I get to a certain point that is going to be another variation, I'll let you know so that we can just keep moving forward. Okay, so this was just part one of how to alter the Vogue V8957 pattern, and I am going to show you just what it's going to look like. Let me go ahead and put it on the mannequin so you can get a better look. Okay, so this is the finished garment for the Vogue V8957 pattern. It is a gorgeous jacket. It's lined with this beautiful floral fabric that just pops. It has the satin pickable cuffs on the inside. I created it with this beautiful faux fur fabric that's lightweight and easy to wear. I think that you're really gonna love it. So come back for the next video so we can walk through just how to create this beautiful bolero.